Go away. That was the first thing Mr. Charles Huxley said to the little girl standing at his gate. He hadn't even looked up from the newspaper he was holding. He just muttered it, gruff and impatient, hoping the child would take the hint. But she didn't move. She stood there, a tiny figure with a faded pink backpack hanging from one shoulder, her dark hair tied in pigtails, looking up at him with the kind of courage only children could have. "Will you walk me to school?" she asked softly. Charles finally glanced up, his brows furrowed. Walk her to school? What kind of ridiculous request was that? He was the CEO of Huxley Enterprises, a multimillionaire who controlled half the real estate developments in the city. He didn't walk anyone anywhere. His chauffeur drove him to places in a black Mercedes. His assistants fetched his coffee. His schedule was packed down to the minute. And yet here was this little neighbor girl, asking him of all people to walk her to school. It was absurd. It was laughable. And yet, for some reason, he couldn't laugh. The girl next door. The girl's name was Emma. She had just moved into the old brick townhouse next door with her mother. The place was worn, with paint peeling on the window frames and a crooked mailbox that leaned forward like it was tired of standing. Charles had noticed them the day they moved in, boxes piled up on the curb. He hadn't cared. New neighbors, old neighbors, it didn't matter. He kept to himself. But Emma had noticed him. She noticed the tall man with gray at his temples who never smiled. She noticed how he left early in the morning with his suit pressed to perfection, and how he returned late at night, always alone. She noticed that no one visited him, and that even though his house was big and beautiful, with polished windows and a manicured lawn, it seemed strangely empty. And maybe that's why she asked. Her own father wasn't there, hadn't been for years. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital. Emma usually walked to school alone, clutching her backpack straps tight, passing the long stretch of quiet streets. She didn't mind, not really. But sometimes, when the mornings were too cold or too lonely, she wished someone could walk beside her. Just once. So she asked. The refusal. Charles shook his head, folded his newspaper, and muttered, "I don't have time for this." He turned to go back inside. But Emma's voice followed him. "Please, just today." Something in that voice, so small, so hopeful, made him pause. He clenched his jaw. Why should he care? He had a board meeting in an hour. He had contracts to review, investors to impress. His entire empire didn't run on kindness or favors, it ran on power, efficiency, and control. And yet, he turned back. Her big brown eyes were fixed on him, waiting. He sighed. Fine, just today. The first walk. They walked in silence. Charles in his tailored suit, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Emma, with her scuffed sneakers and backpack swinging at her side. She skipped sometimes, humming a tune under her breath, while he walked stiffly, checking his watch every few minutes. "You walk really fast," she said at one point, puffing as she tried to keep up. "You walk really slow," he retorted without thinking. Emma giggled. "Maybe we should walk in the middle." And for the first time in years, Charles almost smiled. When they reached the school gates, she stopped and looked up at him. "Thank you, Mr. Huxley." He cleared his throat. Don't mention it. And he meant it. He hoped she really wouldn't. The next morning, she was there again. "Will you walk me to school?" He nearly groaned. "I told you, just yesterday." But Emma didn't move. "I liked walking with you. Please." Something inside him bristled. He wasn't a babysitter. He wasn't her father. And yet, against every instinct, he found himself saying, "All right." But this is the last time. It wasn't. A routine forms. Days turned into weeks. Almost every morning, Emma was there, waiting. And almost every morning, Charles gave in. At first, he told himself it was just easier to say yes than argue. But gradually, something shifted. He found himself walking a little slower, so she didn't have to run to keep up. He found himself asking small questions, "How's school?" Or, "Did you finish your homework?" though he pretended not to care about the answers. He found himself noticing things he hadn't in years, the crispness of autumn air, the way the leaves crunched underfoot, the sound of a child's laughter echoing down the street. Emma filled the silence with stories. About her teacher who wore funny socks. About the stray cat she saw near the playground. About how she wanted to be an astronaut, or maybe a baker, or maybe both. Charles listened, though he pretended not to. And one day, when she told him about a girl at school who teased her for not having a father, something in his chest tightened. He wanted to tell her she was strong, that she didn't need anyone to complete her. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, He just walked beside her, quietly. Sometimes silence was enough. The challenge. But not everyone understood. When Charles arrived late to a shareholders' meeting because he'd walked Emma to school, his board noticed. When he started pushing back morning appointments, his assistant frowned. "Sir, people are beginning to talk. You've never been distracted before." He snapped at her. "I'm not distracted." But he was. And then came the worst blow, when Emma stopped waiting for him. One morning, he opened his door to find the sidewalk empty. He frowned, checked his watch. Maybe she'd overslept, but as he walked down the block, he saw her ahead, walking alone. "Emma," he called. She turned, surprised. "Oh, hi, why didn't you wait?" he asked, more sharply than he intended. She kicked at a pebble. "I didn't think you wanted to anymore. You're always busy. Mom said I shouldn't bother you." The words hit him harder than he expected. Didn't want to bother him. He opened his mouth to protest, but the truth caught in his throat. For so long, his life had been built on keeping people away, on building walls instead of bridges. And now, the one person who had slipped past those walls was pulling back. He crouched slightly, trying to meet her eyes. "Emma, I do want to." Her face softened. "Really, really." And for the first time in years, Charles realized he meant it. The turning point. One stormy morning, everything changed. Emma's mother called Charles in a panic. She was stuck at the hospital, and Emma was sick, running a fever. Could he check on her? Charles, who had never in his life taken care of a sick child, found himself hurrying next door. He found Emma curled on the couch under a blanket, shivering. "I'm fine," she whispered weakly. But she wasn't fine. She was pale, trembling, and her forehead burned when he touched it. He stayed with her that whole day. He made her soup, though he nearly burned the pot. He read her stories, awkwardly at first, stumbling over the words, until she giggled and corrected him. He sat by her side until she fell asleep, her small hand resting on his sleeve. And something inside him cracked open. He realized then that he hadn't just been walking her to school. He had been walking himself back into life, back into feeling, into caring, into remembering what it meant to matter to someone. The backstory revealed, Charles had once had a family, a wife, a little boy, but years ago, a car accident had taken them both. Since then, he had buried himself in work, building his empire brick by brick, dollar by dollar, trying to fill the void. But no amount of money could fill the silence of an empty house. No business deal could erase the ache of loss. He had locked his heart away, convincing himself he was better off alone. Until Emma, she had asked a simple question, "Will you walk me to school?" And unknowingly, she had pulled him out of the shadows he had built around himself. Resolution. By springtime, the routine was unbreakable. Every morning, Charles walked Emma to school. Not as a reluctant neighbor, but as a friend. As family. The board of directors grumbled about his new distractions, but Charles didn't care. He had learned that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. And one day, as they reached the school gates, Emma slipped her hand into his and said, "I'm glad you're my neighbor, Mr. Huxley." He squeezed her hand gently, his throat tight. "And I'm glad you're mine." Final message. In the end, it wasn't about a CEO, or a millionaire, or even about walking to school. It was about two lonely souls finding each other. About how sometimes the smallest request, the simplest gesture, can change the course of a life. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect plans. Sometimes, healing begins with just one step, and someone to walk beside you. And all it took was a little girl brave enough to ask, "Will you walk me to school?"